Hey everybody, welcome to Fit Tip Tuesday. Today I'm going to show you how to reduce the flare of your ready-to-wear jeans. And this is kind of a fun topic for me because I love taking stuff apart and putting it back together. And actually I have a pair of jeans in front of me that I've already reduced the flare on one leg. So I'm going to show you what a hem looks like if you have a straight leg versus a flare, and then I'm going to show you how to make a tapered leg from a flare. So in front of me I have this pair of jeans, and you can see that this leg has a flared hem and this leg has a straight leg. Now when you're talking about a straight leg style, that basically means that the width of the hem is fairly equal to the width of the knee. So from the knee down, it's a straight tube of fabric basically. And the other thing that's interesting that I can show you before we start working is you can see on this leg that I've already adjusted, the original top stitching is still intact on the inseam. So I'm going to show you how to reduce the flare and keep the original top stitching along the inseam. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to need a seam ripper. All right, you can see I have two seam rippers here. This is Dritz's Deluxe seam ripper, and it's a very large seam ripper. And then I also have a Clover seam ripper that's a smaller blade. The reason why I'm showing you this is because sometimes when you're working with denim and you're trying to take out like heavy top stitching thread, it's safer to use the bigger seam ripper blade because I've actually ripped off or snapped the tips on my smaller seam rippers. So it's good to have a variety of seam rippers in your toolbox when you're working on taking things apart. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I am going to just take apart the hem at the side and inseam. I'm not going to take apart the whole hem, but we want to be able to get in there so we can reduce the flare. So I'm going to use the larger seam ripper here, and I am going to just pick at these bobbin thread stitches until I have enough of them where I could slide the ball of the seam ripper in. Remember, you always want to put the ball end in where you can't see it, and it'll protect the fabric from getting ripped in places you don't want it to be ripped. And then I'm just going to slide my seam ripper about half an inch or maybe an inch on each direction, so it opens up like this. So again, I'm just going to slide the ball side underneath like this. Okay, so now you can see I've freed up the hem, and actually I'm going to go a couple inches on each side because remember I'm going to show you how to do tapered jeans. So I'm just going to slide my seam ripper like this. Okay, and let me do it on the other side. Okay, so you can see how easy that is to take that apart without making a hole. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the side seam side. I'm just going to pick a couple stitches to loosen up that hem. All right, and then I'm just going to stick the ball of the seam ripper in between, and I'm just going to slide it along. Okay, see how easy that comes out? Okay, all right, so now let's look and see what we have. So you can see I took out the hem, And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take apart my inseam. Now, I want my inseam to look like the ready-to-wear version. So instead of picking it apart, I'm actually going to use my large sharp scissors, and I'm going to cut along the folded edge of the top stitched seam. So basically what I'm going to do here is I am going to start cutting, and I'm just going to sort of make sure I'm pressing the blade against this finished edge to get as clean of a finish as I can, or as clean of a cut as I can. And I am going to separate that seam up to where I want to start taking the leg in. So you may want to try your jeans on and sort of pin where you want to start to take them in. So let's pretend that I did that, and let's say I want to start taking them in about here. And I can use my Choco liner to just sort of draw a line. Okay, so that's about where I'm going to start to taper them. And then on the side seam, we're going to pick that apart because we're going to sew that back. And here's the thing about side seams. Side seams are usually pressed open like this. And I'm just going to use my seam ripper. Again, I'm going to be putting in the ball side where I can't see it, and I'm basically going to slide my seam ripper right up that seam. So if I put the ball underneath where I can't see it, and I just start pushing, you can see I can take apart this seam really easily. Now, some side seams will tear apart really easily, and the way you can tell if a seam is going to tear apart easily is to look to see how it was constructed. This was stitched with a 5-thread on the serger, meaning there's a 3-thread here and then a separate stitch here. And if I turn it over, you can see the chain looper made that seam. Those don't tear apart, especially if it's with the top stitching thread. So instead of trying to tear this one, I'm going to just stick my seam ripper in the bottom, or in between. I'm going to hold the bottom of the hem, and I'm just going to slide up. And you can feel that it's just ticking away at the threads. If you feel any super resistance, check to make sure you're not cutting the denim. But it's fairly easy to just cut this apart like this. Okay, and I'm gonna take it apart up to the same level that I took apart the inseam. All right, so I've got this pretty close. Let's lay it flat and see. All right, you can see I have a little bit more to go here, so let me see if I can do it from this side. Okay, so see how easy that is? Okay, it's almost as easy to take it apart with the seam ripper that way as it was for me to cut this edge over here. So the next step is we are going to decide how narrow we want this leg to be. And on my inseam side, I'm only going to take it off of the back leg so I can keep this top stitching. Now, if you want a really tight tapered leg, you're going to have to take some off the front too, or it will become twisted and unbalanced. But I can get away with making, you can see here, the back leg is about 2 inches or almost 2.5 inches wider than my front leg. So, you know, about 2 inches actually. So I can make the back and front legs the same width down at the hem. So I can automatically get rid of that. So if let's make a mark here. I am going to, let's flip up the the front leg out of the way, I am going to, let's say, I can taper my back leg. Let's taper the inseam in the back. Let's do 1 3/4 inches. So I'm just going to draw a line at first. I'm not going to cut anything, but I'm going to do 1 3/4 inches, and then I'm going to gradually bring that up to my original knee. But we're just going to draw a line for now because I want to check it before I cut it. Okay, like this. Okay, so I've got one there. And then on my other side, I am going to get rid of 1 1/2, or we can probably do 1 3/4 on this side too. So let me just lay my ruler here. So let's do 1 3/4 here. And again, we're going to be blending that back into the original seam up at the top. Like this. Okay, so you can see I've tapered the back leg. So the back leg will be 7 inches when it's sewn. So now let's look at the front leg. The front leg measures 9 inches now. Let's see. I'm going to take off one and a half on my side seam. Like this. And I want to make sure I'm blending back to the original raw edge up at the top. Oops. Okay, so now I've got this edge, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this off. With my rotary cutter. And then as I get to the original edge, I want to make sure I make a really gradual taper to that finished edge like this. Oops. Okay, so there's one leg. And then let's look at the back leg. I'm just going to cut those off. Oops. I'm just cutting along my chalk line, making sure that we blend right up to the original edge up at the top. Okay. All right, so now I have a gradual taper. Let's look at the leg now that I cut it. Okay, so you can see at the bottom my hems are matched, meaning I have almost the same width front to back. And then my back leg is a little bit bigger here, but that's all right. So that's how it looks right now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew together the side and inseams a little bit differently. So on my inseam, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Wonder Tape, which is a double-sided sticky tape, and I'm going to stick it along the raw edge of this denim. And let's just lay it like this. So I'm going to start down at the hem, right here, and I'm just going to stick it onto the edge of the cut edge of the inseam like this. All right, so again, I'm going to stick that all the way up to where I started to take it apart, like that. And then I'm going to peel the protective paper off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlap the finished side, just that little less than a scant quarter inch right on top of my Wonder Tape like this. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just lapping the seam, and the Wonder Tape is going to hold it for me. I'm just going to go all the way down to the hem, like this. And when you do this, sometimes it works out that the length of your hem might not match up exactly, but we'll fix that when we fold it back up. Okay, so there we have one hem, okay, stuck on. Now it's very important to sew this one permanently in place before you sew your side seam back up. The side seam is going to be a traditional seam, but basically we've got this stuck together, and you can see we can sew it flat. Okay, so up at the top, we're going to start up past where we took it, cut it apart, and we're just going to sew that flat like that. Okay, so let me get my sewing machine. I'll be right back. I think it's easier to work with the leg inside out, so I'm going to turn my leg inside out. Then what I can do is I can get in like this, and I can bring the leg all the way to the point right above where I started to cut it. And the idea here is we want to just stitch in a thread that's going to blend in with your denim, and I like to try to catch it between the original top stitching and the folded edge or the finished edge. So I just have my regular straight stitch foot on here. So I am just going to start stitching. I'm just going to stitch right down this, right down this inseam. And I'm trying not to stitch on the top stitching itself because I want it to look like I didn't take it apart. All right, so here's what my inseam looks like. It's nice and tapered. Now let's look at our side seam. Okay, so the side seam, I think what I would do here is I would run this off on the serger or use a 3-step zigzag to finish this edge so it doesn't become unraveled. So, either use your 3-step zigzag or a serger to finish those edges before you sew them back together. And I'm not going to take the time in this video to show you that, but basically you do want to finish them because otherwise they will, you'll lose your seam allowance, they'll fray. But basically now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin these back together. I'm going to use some Wonder Clips here. So see, now that we finished the inseam flat, it's really easy just to sew this back together into a tube. Like this. Okay, so there is our seam. So now I am just going to sew that, and again I'm going to start up at the original side seam and blend over. Alright, so you can see I'm just going to back tack here, and I'm going to stay on the seam as long as it's intact, and then I'm going to sew my 1/2 inch seam allowance. All the way down to the raw edge of the fabric. All right, so now let's see how we're going to put the hem back together. Okay, so let's look and see what's happening here. I'm just going to, the side seam is going to be really easy because everything matched up, but because we took some off of the back leg but not the front leg on the inseam, we're gonna have to do a little finagling. So you can see here, see how nice that'll be, and we'll just connect our top stitching. So I'll just put a couple clips there to hold that. Okay, and remember to finish your edges either with a 3-thread narrow on your serger or use that triple zigzag on each side before you sew that. All right, and then let's look at the side. The side is a little uneven, so we're going to have to woodgie it a little bit. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press the whole hem allowance flat like this. Okay, and then that will allow me to fold it back up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the hem so that it's agreeing with the original fold, and then I'll deal with the allowance in a minute. So basically, let me just turn it right side out here for a second so I can show you. Okay, so we want to create a nicely, lined up bottom edge. So let me just press that first. So we're going to have to roll the side that was shorter a little bit. So let me just create the crease first. Okay, so that looks nice and straight. Now I'm going to turn it inside out. Like this. So I'm just going to turn this little edge under that little bit. Okay. And like I said, I am sort of manipulating the hem a little bit, and depending on how much you take off, how much you taper the back versus front inseam, you may not have as much of a difference as I had, but I wanted to show you if that does happen to you, you can still create a nicely finished hem just by sort of repositioning the final fold or the folded edge at the bottom. So I'm just going to put some clips here to to hold it, and then I'll show you how it looks. Okay. All right, so now let's go back to the sewing machine. You want to find top stitching thread that is very close to the top stitching thread on your ready to wear jeans. And I'm just going to use pink, which is a different color, just so you can see, you know, the top stitching I'm adding here to the hem. I mean, your other option is you can take all of the top stitching out and, you know, hem the entire hem from scratch, but you can also try to match it. So I'm going to use pink so you can see the difference. And I have a top stitch needle in my machine, so the eye is big enough to handle the heavier thread. Okay, I'm going to start over here like this. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to just overlap my stopping point by about 3 stitches, and I'm hand walking it so I cover them. Then I'm going to go backward a stitch or 2, and then we're going to go forward. I'm just going to top stitch that hem back in place. I'm just going to overlap like 2 stitches, and then I'm going to back up. Okay, so you can see I'm starting again about 3 stitches from where I stopped taking it out, and then I'm going to back tack, you know, 1 stitch here. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to overlap my ending point here, and then I'm going to back tack. All right, so let's take a look at what we have. Okay, so you can see now we have a tapered hem, and we managed to keep the original top stitching. I will say I want to mention though, if you're working with a really flared pair of jeans, you're going to have to take off both of the front and back inseams, and you'll have to redo the top stitching. This flare was sort of, you know, a smaller amount of flare, so I could get away with leaving it. Okay, so just, you know, consider what you're doing and look and see how much you ultimately would like to get rid of, because if the jeans are, you know, more flared than what I have pictured here, I think I would, when you take your inseam apart, cut off equal amounts front and back. But this is an example of how you can, you know, maintain the character of your jeans by leaving the original inseam top stitching. All right, so if you have any questions, please post them below and I will help you. On Friday, I'm going to show you my button fly or zipper fly front closure for the new jeans I'm working on. And I'm also going to show you the new cover I'm making for my newly skinnied up Ditto Form. I got to spend some time with Carol from Ditto Form today, and it was such a fun day. We really, you know, we worked on my Ditto Form, we went out to lunch. It was so much fun. It was so nice to see her, so that was really nice. But anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you live at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for FabFit Friday on Friday. Okay, bye-bye.